The raising of the flags of Outer Mongolia and Mauritania at United Nations headquarters a few days ago increased the membership in the World Organization to 103 member states, all perplexed and deeply concerned over the continuing debate on cessation of nuclear testing. This is John McVane bringing you this week's edition of United Nations Review. As this past week began, the United Nations General Assembly was on record with one of the largest majorities ever recorded in favor of an appeal to the Soviet Union not to explode the 50-megaton bomb announced by Chairman Khrushchev in advance. The vote was 87-11 with one abstention. Before the flag-raising ceremony, the two new member countries had been admitted to the Assembly in time to take part in that vote. Mauritania voting with the majority for the appeal to Moscow, Outer Mongolia voting with the East European countries against the appeal. A few minutes after the flags were raised, delegates assembling in the Political Committee on Monday, October 30th, learned that the Soviet Union had just exploded a bomb with a force of somewhat over 50 megatons. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson announced to the committee that American scientists had confirmed the explosion. Turning to Ambassador Serapkin, he charged the Soviet Union with exploding a monstrous and unnecessary weapon, with raising atmospheric pollution to new heights, with spurning the humanitarian appeal of the United Nations and all peace-loving nations. Mr. F.H. Corner of New Zealand spoke for one delegation which had voted in favor of the appeal to the Soviet Union not to explode the bomb.
My delegation had not, in fact, judged that the Soviet government would carry through its stated intention of exploding a bomb of this appalling magnitude. Not that we were so naive as to believe that they would necessarily yield in deference to world opinion, for there has been ample evidence that the Soviet leaders are not easily moved from their courses by even the deepest feelings of others. But we had noted the statement that a bomb in the 50 megaton range serves no conceivable military purpose, and the Soviet Union in the past has usually had a deadly serious military purpose. Moreover, it seemed inescapable that such a bomb would subject the Soviet people, as well as others, to vastly increased dangers from radioactive fallout. The act seemed inconsistent with their positive belief in the destiny of their own future generations.
Speaking of the same meeting, the Soviet representative, Ambassador Semyon Serapkin, quoted from remarks made the previous week by Premier Khrushchev to the effect that Western circles were raising a hysterical fuss about tests that were needed to protect the communist countries and the peace of the world in the face of Western warlike moves. Mr. Serapkin referred to the increasing tension in the Berlin situation with Soviet tanks facing American tanks, and he stressed the need for general and complete disarmament. We hear him now through official UN interpretation.
These last days, the situation in Europe, in the center of Europe, in Germany, has become even more complex. Instead of following the road of reasonable negotiations to solve the problems of Germany, tanks are confronting tanks, and at any moment a war can start. And this is what we must prevent with all our efforts and all our strength in order to avoid that war. And there is only one road to do that: disarmament. And when you say that there has never been such acts of violence against humanity, well, you must remember the bombs thrown on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the nuclear and rocket war that is being prepared. This would indeed be something without precedent in the history of humanity, and not the measures which we take to prevent that war.
Ambassador Adlai Stevenson exercised his right of reply and referred to Mr. Tsarapkin's charge that the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II fulfilled no military needs.
He said that when the United States were the first to build atomic bombs, they felt morally justified in dropping them on Hiroshima, although there was no military justification for that in his judgment. At that time, I invite the committee's attention to the fact that we heard no protest whatsoever from the Soviet Union. Indeed, if I am not mistaken, when Stalin was informed at Potsdam that the United States had the atom bomb, he replied, "I hope you use it." We heard no protest from the Soviet Union.
All the members of the United Nations are on record as wishing for an end to nuclear testing. The Soviet Union maintains, however, that it must be free to test in the interests of its own security unless there is general and complete disarmament, and has urged that nuclear testing and disarmament be discussed together. But the majority decided that the question of these tests be discussed separately and gave priority to that discussion. The present phase of the debate is concerned with two different approaches to the problem of how to bring nuclear testing to an end. The first, proposed by India and 5 other countries, would call for an immediate moratorium on all nuclear tests, pending conclusion of a treaty embodying international controls or an agreement on general and complete disarmament. Those favoring this approach argue that the tests must stop immediately and it might take too long to conclude a treaty. The other approach is that proposed jointly by the United States and Britain. It calls for the immediate conclusion of an international test ban treaty, but opposes the declaration of a moratorium in the meantime. Sir Michael Wright, Britain's chief expert, has stressed that most clauses of such a treaty have already been agreed at Geneva, and that the Western powers were prepared immediately to negotiate major points of difference still outstanding. These points, he said, were the number of inspections of suspicious events which might take place in any one year, and the leadership and composition of the international scientific teams which would carry out the inspections. The Western powers have said they could not again accept an uninspected moratorium because the Soviet Union had destroyed all trust by unilaterally, without warning, breaking the moratorium which had existed for the past 3 years. The Soviet Union, for the reasons it explained in arguing that nuclear testing could be properly considered only in the context of general and complete disarmament, is in agreement with the Western powers in opposition to the simple declaration of a moratorium at this stage. For Britain, Mr. Joseph Godber, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, expressed his dissatisfaction with the Indian proposal.
I am bound to oppose the draft resolution sponsored by the delegations of Ethiopia, Ghana, India, Nepal, the United Arab Republic, and Yugoslavia. I do this with regret, Mr. Chairman, because I believe that our aims and those of the Indian and other delegations sponsoring this resolution are the same, namely to stop nuclear weapon tests. Differences arise between us only when it comes to see how best we can achieve this aim. How can we now reasonably be expected to agree to another such uncontrolled moratorium at this time? Even if the Soviet Union showed any willingness to respond belatedly to the appeals that have been directed to them, and their latest statements and actions give little hope of this, how can we now place any faith at all in Soviet observance of an uncontrolled moratorium?
General E.L.M. Burns of Canada expressed his country's desire to vote for the Indian proposal. His country favors a moratorium, but will also support the U.S.-British proposal for a nuclear test ban treaty.
Nuclear powers assert that they have been or may be obliged to resume testing because their national security requires it. Now this, in the view of the Canadian delegation, is in the long term a grave error. A series of tests conducted by one side brings about a subsequent series of tests conducted by the other, and this is the essence of and the most dangerous part of the arms race. Can masses of nuclear weapons confer any security when it's certain that if the powers owning them put them to use, they will go down together in mutual destruction, and destruction which will extend far beyond their own borders? The existence of these weapons is a threat to the nations which possess them, to the nations which do not possess them, and to humanity at large.
Italy's representative argued that a treaty with international controls was the only certain solution for the problem. He stressed the need for speedy action.
We can wait no longer. We cannot await the conclusion, still a distant prospect of negotiations on general and complete disarmament. Mankind is in danger and must, in the meantime, be saved. Then the time will come for disarmament as an essential element in a new order based on law and on peaceful cooperation between nations. The Italian delegation is ready to support any serious initiative that will hasten the conclusion of an international agreement based on specific undertakings and appropriate guarantees for the cessation of all nuclear weapon experimenting under international supervision.
During the debate, a group of Latin American countries put forward an amendment to the Indian resolution expressing the hope that the big powers will agree soon on stopping tests under appropriate international control. Mr. Milko Tarabanov of Bulgaria said he would not support the Indian proposal for a moratorium. He questioned the sincerity of the United States in accepting a moratorium 3 years ago.
It is well known that the United States and the main Western powers, their military allies in the aggressive blocs, have always been opposed to the cessation of nuclear tests, of all tests. And they are firmly opposed to the conclusion of an agreement and the signature of a treaty on general and complete disarmament. The official circles of the United States insisted on continuing nuclear tests in order to increase what they call the versatility of their atomic weapons. This desire of the interested circles of the United States to perfect atomic weapons and adapt them to the needs of the war that they were contemplating was supposedly satisfied by the last tests of 1958. This, we can be sure of it, is the main reason for which the Western powers in 1958 accepted the moratorium proposed by the Soviet Union and requested by world public opinion.
Mr. Arthur Dean, who represented the United States in the Geneva negotiations, asked whether his country should stand by helpless while the Soviet Union improves its own military security. He warned that if the Indian resolution passed, the United States reserves the right to exercise all rights in its own defense and that of the free world against what Mr. Dean called this callous and calculated inhumanity of communism. And so the debate on nuclear testing continues. Now this is John McVeigh saying goodbye for National Educational Television from UN headquarters until next week's United Nations Review.
This is National Educational Television.